Thank you, Mr. Pai. I'll invite Mr. Vijay Chothaiwale to say a few words and just a brief introduction. He is in charge of the foreign affairs at Bharatiya Janata Party, and he is a drug discovery scientist turned politician. He's the man behind the overseas community engagement success that you see whenever Mr. Modi visits foreign countries. So over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for my kind introduction. Also, thank you, Ambassador Pillai, for inviting me here. It was indeed a very enriching experience. Mr. Mohandas Pai has already set up a very rich background of what's happening in India as far as startup is concerned. What I am going to do is to take a brief history of what government used to do in past, what were the major bottlenecks we were facing for the startups, and what the current government is doing to remove some of the bottlenecks. Lot of work is done, lot more has to be done, but the things are going in the right direction. So my talk is mostly focused on the efforts of Indian government under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi on what he is trying to inculcate the ecosystem of startups. So first slide, please. Okay, yeah, sorry. So far government was doing several isolated schemes, right from having the national competition for the talented students to giving the money to various startups in various schemes. But as you will see that most of these schemes were done by various government departments, and there was no uniform policy on how a startup culture can be inculcated. So therefore, these schemes were mostly working in isolation. There were also three very good initiatives. One was Science and Technology Entrepreneurship Development Program. Second was National Innovation Foundation. And the third was by the BIRAC, which is Biotechnology Industry Research Collaboration Research Council by Department of Biotechnology, of which BIRAC was a very unique program which actually started giving seed money to the innovators who have simply the ideas but don't have any capital to start. And that all seed money was given as a grant, and as the work progresses, there were very stringent evaluation mechanisms and parameters in place, and they used to go up, increasing the grant amount and also help them to find other investors. And because of the BIRAC program, several startups have come up in the biotech area, which was otherwise considered to be high risk, high reward industry, where initially in India at least, the venture capital was not available. But as you know that there were many roadblocks. Let me tell you one instance. Prime Minister Modi went to Bay Area, and you must have seen his visit to the Facebooks and Googles, etc. But what he has done also in parallel, that he took help of the professional bodies like NASSCOM and TIE, where the representatives coincidentally are present here, and asked them to represent have a kind of interaction between Indian startups and the startup ecosystem, which is very matured in the Silicon Valley. So 45 startups from India, they went to Silicon Valley, and they had a half-a-day startup convention parallel to Prime Minister Modi's visit. And at the end, the Prime Minister himself went there and encouraged all the startups. But the interesting point is that when this event was announced, 300 venture capitalists, investors, and also startups from Silicon Valley, they joined this event. And this event actually saw a major first time of formal interactions between Indian startups and the startup ecosystem in Silicon Valley. Then the government has asked a lot of people that what they would like to see in the terms of policy changes in inculcating startups in India. And these were some of the bottlenecks they have come out. First of all, definitely the funding was a major issue. Second was startup, as you know, works a lot on good networking and mentoring. The IPR regime there were some bottlenecks, and I will come to it at a later stage. There was also regulatory problems and so on. After taking all these inputs, finally, a big startup action plan was announced by Prime Minister after this visit, and these are some of the salient features of this startup plans. As you know, in India, there are a lot of certifications are required. But for the startups now, there are major certifications are self-declaration, and you don't have to go to any inspector to this. Also, there is a mobile app through which you can go through the government policies, etc. Legal support and fast-track patent submission. So most of these people, they don't know how to protect their IPR, and the government is proactively helping them to file the patents and also funding them for filing and protecting their IPR. This is a very important change because Indian patent system is still very slow as compared to the other developed world. There is also public document procurement. For example, the procurement requires that you should have a 5 years track record. Now, startup cannot have 5 years track record. Therefore, there is a specific policy change that has made so that there can be procurement from the small scale industry. And also, the recent changes in the law, especially bankruptcy and insolvency law, which has been recently passed by both the houses, has made it easier for exit for the startups. There is also credit guarantee fund. We have, the government has announced the 1.5 billion fund of funds, which will inculcate further startup. All that money will go into startups and the small scale industry. And the last and most important part is the tax exemption on the capital gains. Because if you are encashing your IP, generally, typically, the capital gain tax is around in the range of 30%, which is now reduced to 10% if the IP is protected in India. And also, there is a tax exemption for first 3 years. So, there are many things which have been achieved, but I want to focus on this, which is the Atal Innovation Mission. Taking all these things into consideration, now all the innovation-related activities are under the umbrella of Atal Innovation Mission. Atal is after the name of our previous Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee. And this will be an umbrella structure which will drive both the policy as well as the funding structure of Government of India. And they are having both innovation and entrepreneurship. For innovation, they are going to soon announce a grand challenge which will really stretch your brain to achieve something which is otherwise thought to be unbelievable. And also tinkering labs for the school children. There are going to be more than 100 incubation centers, and also there will be a lot of encouragement and awareness about startups and innovation across India. So these are some of the initiatives. I won't go into the details, but this is all available on the Startup India site and also Atal Innovation Mission site. I would request all of you to go through him. I don't think I have time for the case studies, but these are very important success stories which we are doing in collaboration with various companies like Intel. International Science Challenge has become very popular in India. There are, of course, many unresolved issues so far, because even though early stage funding is available, when there is a need for a larger funding, the VC culture is still not yet mature. As Mr. Pai has already said, there are a lot of companies are still registered in Singapore. The Flipkart is still not willing to list itself in Indian share market. These are some of the regulatory constraints. So I'm sure, but with these initiatives in a near term, we will see a big boost in startup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay. I'll invite Dr. Saurabh Shrivastava. He's the founder and chairman of Indian Angel Network, which is one of the largest angel networks, not just in India, but globally, and also the chairman for NASSCOM, which is the apex body for information technology companies.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. So I wanted to start with saying, why is entrepreneurship and indeed innovation so critical? And the reason is, when you look at it globally, the real engine for growth of employment in any country is actually just this, entrepreneurship. And data is available for the US from 1977 to 2005, except for 7 years in between. Every year, net new jobs were created by startups. Large companies destroyed 1 million jobs a year. Startups added 3 million. That is why the US prospers. That's why many countries have taken to this. And it's time for, I think, South Asia to take a cue from this. India alone needs to create 10 to 15 million jobs a year. The whole world needs to create more jobs. And this can be done. And I just wanted to give a brief example out of India, the software industry that Mohan talked about. When I co-founded NASSCOM in '88, we were a $50 million industry. Our dream was someday this should be a $1 billion industry. Last year, it was $160 billion. It's the largest single employer in the organized private sector. So this is what entrepreneurship can do, because except for the Tata Group, everybody in the software industry in India are first-generation entrepreneurs. We've heard some of this from Mohan, so I'll add a couple of things. There is a new vision of India, which you might say is digital India. And where does it spring from? India is now, after China, the second largest internet user base. More importantly, it's growing at 40%. So Google predicts that it'll be 500 million in the next 2-3 years. It's the second largest mobile market in the world. Online retail is heading by 2020 to be 100 billion. But the highest penetration in the world of the internet through mobile. 80% of internet users use it on the mobile. Highest percentage of e-commerce transactions on the mobile, 41% versus 15% in the US. Another 2 or 3 years, will be the largest users of Facebook, 80% through mobile. So you can see the use of social media in India and what that is doing to entrepreneurship. So in many ways, I would just second what Mohan was saying here. You're looking at India as really the new startup nation. And it is amongst the fastest growing startups globally. Mohan talked about 19,400. Since the time he made the slides, there's 100 more startups. It's being driven by a number of factors. Firstly, India itself is becoming a very large, high growth market in many segments. Internet and mobile for sure, IT in education, healthcare, agriculture, clean tech, logistics, fintech, you name it. And India itself is becoming a very large market that's driving this. Increasing availability of risk capital across all stages. This didn't exist barely 5 years ago. It's not where it should be, but it's improving very rapidly. There's no dearth of talent, and the costs are relatively lower compared to most other places. You heard a lot already from my colleague on the panelist on what the government has done, and the government is really focused on an enabling environment today. The other good thing, which is what grew the software industry, there are a lot of role models. There are a lot of precedents, and that's driving a lot of entrepreneurs to come up and really set up companies. And guess what? The youngest startup nation in the world today is not Silicon Valley, it's India. Almost 3/4 of the founders are below 35 years of age. 50% growth in female entrepreneurship, and almost a 5 times growth just last year alone in funding of female-led entrepreneurs. And as a result, last year we saw $20 billion of private equity and venture capital flow into India, and seed and VC funding was up by almost 6 times. So I will not talk too much about the government enabler because we've heard a lot about it, except I would say that the way the government is doing it this time, because I was a member of the earlier National Innovation Council that had been set up by the previous government, but this government is really doing it in a very practical and collaborative way with the private sector. It's not pure government-led. The fund of funds that we're talking about, the 2 billion Singapore dollar as fund that's been created, guess who's deciding on how the investments are made? There's a separate investment committee set up. Mohan and I are part of that committee. It's not being decided by just government people. So there's a very different approach to what is happening today in enabling the startup system. And SEBI, which is our regulator, is very focused on being able to get new age companies to come list in India versus elsewhere. And they already have in place a trading exchange for small companies. And again, I was on the committee which was doing this discussion, huge consultation with startups, with the private sector on how this should actually be done. What did I do? Sorry. So I just wanted to focus on this as I come to the close of the presentation. The entrepreneurial ecosystem in India is not exactly where it should be. It's not the United States yet, but it's very, very rapidly coming of age. You saw many of the indicators that Mohan showed you on what's been happening. Today, we have academic institutions, private sector, public-private partnerships in incubators. And the government has now come out with schemes that will actually assist existing incubators to become world-class and new incubators to come up. You're looking at hundreds of incubators that exist today going to thousands in the next 2 to 3 years. Many accelerators have come up, many of them connected with Silicon Valley, some with the UK, some even with Japan. And now there are many entrepreneur-focused platforms. There's a key one which is TIE, of which I have been a member and a co-founder, but I'll leave a lot of discussion on that with my panelist Rupa, who heads the New York chapter. But TIE today has 15,000 members in 61 chapters, 18 countries, 16 of those chapters are India, there's one in Singapore and other parts of South Asia. It's the largest single organization in the world focused on entrepreneurship. And it does mentoring. It encourages people to become entrepreneurs. Angel networks didn't exist when I founded the Indian Angel Network 8 years ago. There were none that existed. Within 8 years, just to show what's happening in the Indian entrepreneurial system, this angel group, IN, has become the largest angel group in the world. We have 400 plus members. We see 5,000 entrepreneurs. You end up doing one investment every 2 weeks. That's what's happened to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I talked already about VCP firms, 150 of them are there. What's very encouraging is the rise of domestic corporations that are getting into corporate venturing, which didn't happen earlier. There were foreign companies doing it, now they're domestics. Indian family offices are beginning to invest in angels, in VC funds and private equity funds, and a lot of successful entrepreneurs, I mean, we ourselves are investing back in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so I want to finish with my last slide to say I see a lot of opportunities for collaboration across the region. If you look at Indian entrepreneurs, they used to be focused only on the West, the strong Silicon Valley connects, no longer true. They're looking at domestic markets in India, they're looking at markets eastwards and in the region. TIE itself, and Rupa, you can talk more, it has chapters in several parts of Asia. Could there be more? Absolutely. And there has been collaboration in angel groups. At the Indian Angel Network, for example, we've been able to create a model which allows angel investing to happen globally and collaboratively. Usually that has not been the case. Within the collaboration parts, NASSCOM, of which I was a part, helped in the creation of the Pakistan Software Association called PASHA and the Sri Lankan Software Association called SLASCOM. At IAN, we've been involved in helping create the Lankan Angel Network. Today, Chinese and Singaporean entrepreneurs and investors are investing in India. We have invested in 6 countries outside of India in the region. So I think there's huge opportunities to collaborate, leverage markets, investments, talent, business models, and entrepreneur-focused organizations. And I would in particular talk about business models because if I look across Asia, then there's more commonality in business models and in customer behavior than there would be between India and the Silicon Valley. So with that, I just want to say thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you, Dr. Srivastava. I'll now invite Mr. Stephen Leonard to talk to us. And Mr. Stephen Leonard, as you know, is the chairman of the Infocom Development Authority. And he's built multiple technology companies, and I think there's a lot we can learn from his technology experience.
Okay, thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to walk and talk a little bit. For me, I hope that I haven't been inadvertently invited to join the panel because I'm actually not here to talk about how amazing India is, although I think it is amazing. And having had the chance to build up hardware and software companies over the years, including a lot of work with engineering teams in different parts of India, I am a believer that there is a huge contribution that India has made, is making, and will make to technology and to moving innovation forward. However, I'm here to talk about what Singapore is doing, and I hope that we can then find areas of collaboration and cooperation together, because I do think that the things that we're working on transcend what any one country or any one organization can do by any stretch. So I'll touch briefly on what Singapore is working on and why we are working on something called Smart Nation. For us, we've said that we are a nation built on innovation. And having lived here a long, long time, and as a permanent resident of Singapore, I consider Singapore our home. And so we have built a nation on innovation, from some basic problems on through to some more challenging problems. These are shared challenges that we all face. So whichever country, even if India is one of the youngest countries in the world, the reality is if you're blessed enough to be alive, you are getting older. And so an aging population is something that either affects everyone now or will affect people in the near future. In Singapore's case, we have a very significant demographic challenge, which is we have a tripling of citizens over the age of 65 in the next 12 to 13 years. So a 300% growth of that demographic is a significant challenge. Now there's implications on health and on transportation and on resource and so on, so we'll touch on that. Urban density. Singapore is one of the most densely populated countries. Now there's places that are more densely populated, but as a country, because we don't have any other place to go, Singapore is a densely populated island, and we need to think about the implications of that in terms of resources and transportation and housing and public safety. Looking back, why do we say that we're a nation built on innovation? So here's a picture of Singapore in 1965. And so challenges were basic. Safe housing. Needed to make sure that there was clean water supply, that people were safe. So those are important, basic challenges, but not easy to solve. And there's many, many examples of what went on to be the case, Housing Development Board, in which 80% of citizens now live. The reason that that's important is because some of our future models, future healthcare, thinking about how people can be cared for in the home is possible because of that type of construct. So we're working today to think of how housing becomes a virtual extension of all of the healthcare ecosystem in Singapore. Those problems were worked on. Here's the problems we're working on now. Transportation. We already try and keep as many private vehicles off the road as we can, but there's always more that we can do. More public transportation, more sharing infrastructure, but we're interested in things such as driverless vehicles. How do we think of that in a commercial context, in terms of delivering goods? How do we think of that of moving people? Resources, energy, electricity is a very big growth area for us. We have a lot of beautiful lights in the city, but it's also a growth area. We don't want to build more power generation plants. We want to use energy more efficiently. So we're trying to think about conservation in addition to production, and health for the reasons that I just touched on. Chronic conditions, I'm sure everyone in the room knows, the longer you live, the more chronic conditions you stack up. And so now people live with conditions for years and years and years that 2 or 3 generations ago would have been a terminal case. But that also has big implications on healthcare. So we're thinking about this as Smart Nation and a Team Singapore approach, and I think this will also lead into entrepreneurship and innovation in a way that I hope is clear. Here's what we're working on as one of our first areas of focus: as much connectivity as we can create in as many places. So our aspiration is everyone and everything, everywhere, all the time. That means below ground, so when you're in a train tunnel, that means in certain lift shafts, in certain buildings. And the reason is because we want to make sure that in a future healthcare model, for example, if you're wearing a sensor that your caregiver is using to make sure that you are okay, it's not acceptable then if that signal is lost while you're in an underground tunnel, because we don't know if you're in distress or if you're on the train. So connectivity is a foundation for us. We already have 1 gigabit fiber to 100% of the island. We're working to make sure that we have no place in the island that has a lack of Wi-Fi and cellular coverage. So we're working to get 99% coverage across the island in the next year. We also want to make sure that policy and standards are the friend, so we don't think of policy and standards as the enemy of innovation. Sometimes people say, gee, if we only had fewer regulations, everything would be great and we'd be very innovative. But no one wants to be in an airplane or in a vehicle or in a doctor's office that doesn't have some regulatory input. So regulation can also be important for clarity, to give a framework for innovation. So we want to make sure that we work closely. The Monetary Authority of Singapore is also one of our close partners, and we'd like to work with HKMA, or the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, RBI, and many others, because this is where we can be good teammates. We have, we believe, all the parts of the ecosystem. So we have some great universities, we have some great talent, including non-native talent. We have some great capital. We have thousands of corporations that are here that call Singapore home. And we also have a supportive government, a single layer of government. So if we're trying to do something in health, we know pretty much who to speak with. Transportation, same thing, and so on. So the good news is, when Prime Minister was hosting the dinner last night, Prime Minister is the one supporting Smart Nation and the vision for what we can do. And the goal is to bring all these parts of the ecosystem together. The goal is to make sure that when we think about innovation, startups play a role, corporates play a role, investors play a role. And that's where we see the link between entrepreneurship and innovation. Tackling tough problems. So one of the expressions used earlier was innovative startups. We'll all agree that a lot of startups are not innovative. They are clones or derivatives of something that somebody did somewhere, and there's a hope that if we do it just in this particular slightly different way, we can build a company. That's okay in some markets. Our goal is to challenge the companies with whom we work to think about how do we work on a different healthcare paradigm. Not how do we make waiting time in a doctor's office 5 minutes less, but how do we shift medicine from a physical relationship to a virtual relationship that's supplemented as needed with physical? How do we think of different types of medications and sensors and ways to provide care that are different from what happens today so as to meet the future needs of a citizenry? So those are the things that we're trying to challenge people to think about. So for us, Smart Nation is if we all work together, including with lots of different teammates and partners outside of Singapore for sure, then we believe we can achieve some important breakthroughs. Our goal is not to do something incremental, it's to do something exponential. It's not to do something continuously improving, but to have discontinuous improvement, vertical change, as in step change, so that we can really see some breakthroughs. That for us is what we aspire to do. That for us is what innovation and entrepreneurship represents. Completely agree that it's all about creating economic engines and jobs. We don't want to be a host of technology. We would like to be an originator and a contributor of technology. And we'd like to work together with many different people in the room. So for us, it's not tech, it's mindset. Are we willing to take a big gamble? Are we willing to try something we don't know the answer to? Are we willing to try something that almost certainly will not work out in its first iteration? but we know that the effort is worth it. We know that the goal is worth it. Now for us, that's a challenge because we're very good at making sure that things work well. That's part of the pride of Singapore. But the challenge to do something really amazing is to go where you know that it's going to be difficult and uncertain. That's the breakthrough. That's what we're trying to encourage, and that's what we're calling Smart Nation. And love to work with anybody and everybody that wants to be a part of trying to solve difficult things. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. I'll now invite Ms. Rupa Unikrishnan. Rupa is the president of TIE in New York and heads a consulting firm called Center 10 Consulting, which works on new product development and innovation-related issues.
So some of you may have been watching me futz around with my phone. Say hello, you've got some people watching you from London and some in the I think it's close to midnight in New York, so hello, and everyone says hello. Hi, everybody. Come on, look lively, come on. This is free advertising for SADC for 2 years from now. 2 years from now, guys, you can come here. So why am I doing this? Not just a shtick. I think the part of what's going on these days, and that's me showing people my Visa card, but part of what's happening these days is the fact that the conversation is happening outside of the rooms that we're in, right? Your viewers are outside of the rooms that we're in. And so I think my presentation is up. The folks there are not going to watch the presentation. You're going to see my face. That's what they have to deal with. But what's happening now and what we've heard so far is what the government can do, what large institutions can do. I'll talk to you a little bit about what a chapter of a large institution can do, but also about what's happening, I think, trend-wise, is that the speed of change has gotten to the point where part of what we need to do is to stay pretty connected. So we can plan and then more than anything else, I think being open to serendipity. So while Singapore is ready for transportation, you might actually make the biggest contribution in finance, and that's where we'll end up heading, right? So part of that's what TIE and our group in New York is trying to get to happen. So I guess I'm going backward. Let me go here. So I'm going to start with a little sort of piece of advice from Albert Einstein. He talked about how if at first an idea is not absurd, then there's no hope for it. And I think part of what happens sometimes when we're looking at, when angels look at a sort of a proposition, we try to find sense in the idea. More than anything else, what an organization like TIE can do is to help get us to be comfortable with the absurdities around us. Because the idea of a drone, warfare with a drone, can you even imagine 10 years ago, 2000, that was absurd, right? And it's a true reality. So who's invested in the drones? A couple of governmental agencies. Wouldn't have been great if we'd done it and actually used it for peace. Totally different conversation. So how are we ready for this? I think part of this is going to be about how we can inculcate in ourselves this ability to take chances, right? So I'll tell you a story. I was out talking to Mercedes-Benz. We're having a sort of a training program around sort of transformative thinking. And the team, towards the end, the team asked me, what's going to be the next big shift? Because we were talking about trends. What can Mercedes-Benz plan on breaking? What's going to transform? And I said, how about breaking gravity, right? Because what if we were to, as a car company, deal with gravity? And they, laughed me out of the room, right? They made no sense 5 years ago. And now you actually have drones that are being created, which are going to do, this is actually a live prototype, which is going to actually transport up to 6 people. It's sort of powered by 6 drones and can transport up to 6 people just about a car's height along city streets. These are realities, and how do we get to sort of play in these spaces? Well, part of this is going to be about sort of really utilizing the talent we have in play. So if you've heard like Devesh Kumar Kapoor earlier this morning talk about what's happened with this sort of evolution of Indians and Indian innovators. Well, Annalise Saxenian looked at the data, and she said about up to 52% of immigrants the startup community in the US is comprised up to 52% of their founders are immigrants, right? That actually has now gone down to 43%, so there's real concern, a lot of hue and cry. But when we really look closely, the Indian population of that group has continued to grow. So we've gone from 26% to 33%. So what does that mean? Are we as a culture more risk-oriented? You know, I lived in India. No. Short answer, no. I think part of what it is that we've learned very early, what we've learned very early is to figure out the sort of a formula for success, because that we're really smart about. We're really smart about engaging around a question and driving to true outcomes. And what are some of the outcomes? So how do you calculate the value of immigration? Why am I doing this, by the way? Because we happen to have a certain orange presidential candidate who has a problem with immigrants. Well, let me tell you what immigrants have done in the US, right? 52 billion in revenue delivered in the country, right? 450,000 jobs, up to 26% of patents are actually owned in the US by immigrants. Now, he might actually look at this and have a problem with it. The man's not quite rational. But what I've done over the past couple of years is actually run a survey, which will sort of be formulated into a book. And part of my survey insights are that it's not the reason Indians have continued growing our ability to innovate and be in this startup environment is not because we are inherently risk-friendly, right? What we are is we have a very clear sense of the value of a resource. In many cases, so I think the story we may have heard as when we made the immigrant move was, whatever, 80 years ago, you were given an allowance of $15, right? And you had to make it with $15. We all still have that $15 mentality when it comes to resourcing. We really value our every single dollar or every single rupee. So that sort of inherent leanness was very fashionable before the book on lean innovation was written. And that tends to be a key part of it. The second is our superheroes. We happen to have people like Sabir Bhatia that we look up to, the Mohandas Pais, right, and the Saurabh Srivastavas, that we look up to, we see what success, the potential of what this could do to help us along. We have academic qualifications. So 96% of our professional grade groups are truly like in the postgraduate science and tech and is sort of management spaces, right? We tend to leverage our differences pretty effectively. So global in perspective, and partly because we see the world differently. Coming from India, going into any other environment, you sort of look at it and say, goodness, is this really all you can make of this sort of resource pile that you have? So our vision in TIE, and we've had this conversation already to some extent, is to foster entrepreneurship globally. And I'll specifically talk about the 5 elements. It's networking, mentoring, education, funding, and incubation. These are the 5 elements that sort of we use to drive the ecosystem around us. And the result has been the largest pool of intellectual capital anywhere. So TIE has sort of become pretty synonymous with entrepreneurship. We've done boot camps, sort of a huge amount of 200 million in sort of true sort of value creation. And in part of why we're excited in New York, we'd had a sort of issue around about a couple of years ago where our momentum had slowed. And our lesson was you need to sort of keep the foot on the pedal. And so our hope is as sort of India makes this progress towards sort of truly driving startups, that the foot stays on that pedal. Because one of the elements, my time's up, but I'll take two more seconds. One of the elements we're hoping for is for the 20,000 startups that you see, ensuring that those 20,000, because there are more than 20,000 important questions to be solved. So how do we ensure that we're not resulting in half of those 20,000 startups trying to do what Uber does differently, right? What we do need is alternative energy, thinking around sort of true shifts in how we create sort of social good. I think there's a lot of important questions, and raising and addressing the right questions will be the next big step in how we make those startups matter, right? All right, guys, see you.
Thank you, Rupa.
Say bye, guys.